Good afternoon. I'm David Haynes, the opinions editor at the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel. Welcome to On Politics for Thursday, January 5th, and Happy New Year. We're glad to be back. We have a lot to talk about today. Let's first talk about the tweet heard round the world, Donald Trump and how he's managing Congress so far. We're also going to meet the new boss in Madison. Well, actually, same as the old boss. The GOP is in charge, and they have a big agenda. There's a race for state superintendent. We'll talk with Anyssa Johnson of our staff about that. We'll have your winners and losers and reader questions. We're going to be talking to Craig Gilbert, Patrick Marley, Anyssa Johnson, and Mary Spacuzza, and Dan Bice today. First, let's go to Craig Gilbert in Washington. Well, now we're joined by Craig Gilbert. And, Craig, for a long time, there's been a lot of characters in Congress. But earlier this week, it seemed like the only characters that mattered were the 140 that Donald Trump tweeted as the ethics office sort of situation was blowing up. But so what happened there, and where was Paul Ryan at both before and after that Trump tweet that sort of disparaged attempts to defang this independent office?
Well, you had a lot of Republican members that are unhappy with the process of kind of ethics policing of the House members. So they kind of by surprise voted in their caucus on Monday, their closed-door caucus, to overhaul and really kind of defang this independent ethics office in the House. Now, Paul Ryan spoke against doing that in his caucus. I think his position was that, I'm sympathetic to your concerns, but this is the wrong way to do it. And it also sends a bad signal, not the signal we want to send on the first day of the 115th Congress when we're trying to kind of open a new chapter of unified Republican rule. And here we are, creating an ethics controversy. So he spoke against it, but his members voted for it anyway. And then things really hit the fan. I mean, social media sort of exploded, huge amount of media attention. We were getting mixed signals early on from the Trump camp, even mixed signals from Paul Ryan, because while he voted against it in caucus, he put out a statement the next day, kind of playing down the changes, I think sort of, standing up for his members who voted for it. But then Donald Trump weighs in on Twitter. With two tweets, basically not opposing the substance of what House Republicans did, but saying, is this the time to do it when we've got all these big tasks in front of us? And this is a guy, of course, whose slogan was "Drain the Swamp," and who concluded his tweets with a "Drain the Swamp" hashtag.
Yeah, interesting. So just briefly, the Independent Ethics Office arose out of previous controversy in Congress, correct?
Yeah, I mean, it rose in 2008 and 2009 out of House scandals and involving Republicans, in fact. And so it was kind of a Democratic initiative, but it had been in place for 8 years. I mean, there actually are some Democrats who aren't happy with it either. I mean, they have a common interest. I mean, nobody likes to be policed. So they would rather police themselves, which, of course, in the eyes of, watchdog groups does not really cut the mustard. But here's where we are. They may come back to this once the dust is settled, but it was not the story they wanted on their first day, the election of Paul Ryan as their new speaker, as Republicans began to roll out their grand agenda at this moment in time that, as Paul Ryan said, they could only dream about of unified Republican rule in Washington.
Right. Republicans control all the levers of power right now. So what do they intend to do with that power? What's top on the list? I know repealing Obamacare is going to happen. Do they have anything to replace it with? And what are the other priorities that we can expect Paul Ryan to push in the upcoming session?
Yeah. So a lot of attention is going to be on repeal and replacing Obamacare. It's not quite clear how that's going to work. There's going to be an upfront repeal, but what that does to health care and what they replace it with, they're making promises that people won't suffer and won't be hurt. Some independent experts are very skeptical, but that's going to play out this year and into the future. They want to start spending more money on the military. They want to work with Donald Trump on doing something about infrastructure, although it sort of remains to be seen, how much they're going to spend and what shape that is going to take. They really want to do tax reform. Yeah. They're talking about cutting rates, simplifying the tax system, reducing deductions. That's a massive, massive issue with lots of political minefields.
Right, right. On Obamacare for a moment, is it possible that we might see more of a rebranding with changes that protect the kinds of things that Trump has said he wants to protect, but that leave the broad structure in place? Have you heard anything about that?
Well, maybe, but there's so much pent-up demand among the Republican base for a true repeal.
Yeah.
They may have trouble selling that. So they're really caught between the demands of their own, base supporters to just get rid of it, and the fact that they've got millions of people using this program and also benefiting from the Medicaid expansion, and they've got to figure out how to square that circle.
All right, Craig Gilbert in Washington, thanks so much.
Great.
Well, the new legislative session began this week in Madison, and the Republicans have quite the upper hand on the Democrats. We talked to Patrick Marley in Madison. And I'm joined by Patrick Marley. Patrick is a State House reporter for the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel. And Patrick, earlier this week, your colleague in Madison, Jason Stein, wrote that, let me get the quote right here, that the conservative agenda was on a full gallop. The Republicans have the biggest sort of margins they've had in the legislature in nearly 50 years. So what's on that conservative agenda?
And that's, Republicans have controlled Wisconsin for 6 years now. What they're getting now is a Republican president as well. And so some things that they've been stymied on in the past, they feel like they can finally make some traction with. So a good example of that would be drug testing for people with public benefits. That's something they've passed, but they haven't gotten federal approval to do as fully as they would like. This, they're hoping.
Where with Republicans in control of the White House and Congress, that there might be more of an opening for Republicans here in Wisconsin.
Yeah, absolutely. They can, if the Trump administration moves forward with this block granting of Medicaid is a program we call it Badger Care here, where the elderly and the poor, sort of the nature of
that's correct.
Legislative politics.
That's right. That's correct. One final question. This week we learned that Annette Ziegler, conservative state Supreme Court justice, will not have an opponent. Were Democrats in the state capitol surprised that their own party couldn't recruit someone to run against Ziegler? I know it's a nonpartisan race, but it really has broken conservative liberal. What did you hear in the state capitol?
Well, I think that's the latest example of just what troubles the Democrats have, that they can't even recruit somebody to run against a seat. Now, Annette Ziegler will be a formidable opponent. She's done good at fundraising. She's been on the bench for 10 years. But to let that opportunity go, there's certainly no way that the left can win if they don't run somebody. Another factor there, though, is that Mike Gableman is up in a year, and I think many liberals have a particular desire to take him on. And so I think that anybody who may have been thinking of running for the court might rather do it in a year rather than now. Right, but so it's a great example of how in the wilderness Democrats are.
Yeah, so maybe they're keeping their powder dry. Well, we'll talk about that more later. Thanks so much, Patrick Marley in Madison.
Thank you, Dick.
Well, there may not be a race for state Supreme Court this spring, but there will be a primary race in February for state Superintendent of Public Instruction. I spoke with Anyssa Johnson, who covers K-12 schools for us, about that race. I'm with Anyssa Johnson. Anyssa is the reporter who covers K-12 education for the Journal-Sentinel. And Anyssa, there's going to be a big race for state superintendent this year. There's a primary election on February 21st, I believe.
That's right.
And the state superintendent, Tony Evers, has a couple of challengers. Now, you wrote a great piece earlier this week that this could become a proxy battle over school choice. So why is that?
That's right, Dave. As you know, school choice vouchers are very controversial, very polarizing issues, and the candidates fall on opposite sides. Tony Evers, while he argues that we have to now focus on all kids regardless of the sectors, he is not a fan of vouchers. He believes that they take resources away from public schools.
And he's all along had a lot of support from the state teachers union, too.
And the other two candidates support vouchers, and as you know, vouchers are taxpayer-funded vouchers to attend private schools. So they support those. There's some talk that one of the candidates could bring in significant money from elsewhere, from reform advocates who are interested in
now, one of them is
that.
John Humphreys, who's the Dodgeville School District Administrator. He seems to be the one that is getting more of the attention right now. But then retired Beloit Superintendent Lowell Holtz is the other one. Is there any indication so far that they're getting support from school choice advocates?
Well, we haven't seen the financial reports yet. Those come later in the month. Humphreys has said that he has had some interest from Jeb Bush's organization. He also
big supporter of school choice in Florida.
Big supporter of school choice in Florida.
Yep.
And so he said that they have voiced some interest, but they're being a little bit cryptic when you ask for who else is funding them. They've not answered that question.
But if you look at Humphreys' campaign chairs,
right. He is billing this as bipartisan, but they are both school choice advocates. One is they're both state representatives, Republican Jeremy Thiesfeld out of Fond du Lac and Jason Fields, a Democrat out of Milwaukee.
Now, both sides say that they really don't want it to become a proxy battle over school choice. They want to focus on the kids, but reading your article, I have this sense that it's almost inevitable that it will kind of line up that way.
It really is. It's going to come down to who funds it. Will Tony continue to get money from the teachers union, who have tended to see this vouchers as a diminishing public education, and it'll be interesting to see what kind of money comes in to the other side.
So, Anyssa, thanks so much for joining us. Big race coming up for state superintendent. Watch Anissa's reporting at JS Online and in the print edition of the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel. And I'm back with my colleagues, Mary Spacuzza, reporter for the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel, and Dan Bice, a columnist for the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel. So we're going to go to our winners and losers. Mary, Dan, let me start with you. Who's your winner this week?
Mine are connected. My winner is Annette Ziegler, and Patrick talked about this a little bit. Yeah. She doesn't have to run against anybody, and there doesn't have to be any, campaign operation. This has been a while since we've had a Supreme Court justice who was able to scoot through without any opposition. I believe it might have been Justice Crooks, who was the last one who didn't have an opponent. So obviously it's a big winner for her. She doesn't have to go through the whole process.
How surprised were you by that they didn't put anyone up?
I think it's crazy, and that leads us to my loser. I think clearly the Democrats have hit bottom when they can't even put up somebody to oppose a sitting Supreme Court justice. I know a lot. There's a lot of interest in running against Justice Gableman.
Right. And next year, is that next year?
Yeah, I think it's 2018. Yeah. And so I think there's interest in that, but still, you never know what's going to happen in an election year. I mean, if something comes up with Ziegler, there's no opponent, there's no default candidate. And the Republicans, even when they knew they had candidates who weren't going to win, like they put up Judge Randy Koshnick to run against Shirley Abramson, he lost. But again, you just don't know what's going to happen. And it wasn't just that race. The Democrats didn't put up candidates against several Walker appointees here in Milwaukee County. It's, the state's pretty evenly divided, despite, everything. It's pretty much still a purple state, or actually more like a blue state than a red state, blue's red.
Yeah, right,
and,
right.
You would think that the Democratic Party would be able to put up candidates in these races, but they're on a terrible losing streak, and the head of the party, Martha Lanning, seems much more interested in her own re-election bid in June than in getting candidates in these crucial races.
So they've been criticized of her having a thin bench for a while now, but now it's like, is there a bench at all? I mean, if you can't get somebody that's a high-profile seat, that typically draws a lot of interest.
Right. So how do you start the road back if you're the Democrats? Mary, let me start with you.
Oh, my winner or my?
Well,
so no, okay,
just sort of continuing that discussion of where the Democrats go.
They need to. I don't know what is going on with their recruitment of candidates. It just seems like it is. It's just been weak for a while. It seems like there is just constant contention about who should be running as a Dem. There was a lot of fighting, obviously last time about fighting over who should be the gubernatorial candidate. I'm sure we'll be hearing about that probably pretty soon.
And there are a number of Democrats, mainly second-tier and third-tier Democrats, who are talking about running against Scott Walker. And there is an opportunity there because Scott Walker is not particularly popular in the state right now.
Right.
So I don't think it's over or anything like that, but I think they've come close to hitting bottom in terms of, losing seats in both houses in the legislature, losing 3 consecutive races to Scott Walker, and now basically ceding a seat in the third branch of government. It's just not what you want to see from a party that actually represents about 50% of the voters in the state. You would think that they would be much more competitive than they have.
All right, with that,
let's move. They need to get it together pretty quickly, I think.
They do. Mary, let me move to your winners and losers.
Okay.
So, who's
Which one first?
your
Winner? I think
winner?
we're going to win.
Who's your winner?
So, on a happier note, Giannis obviously has been in the news a lot lately, last night especially. And but I think that he's getting a lot of people excited about the Bucks again, which is big news for Milwaukee. Especially.
Great Sports Illustrated story this week on him that just made you love the guy even more.
Yeah, it sounds. I was just reading it actually because you just mentioned that one.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, it sounds like very hardworking, very devoted to.
I always wonder, when I moved here in 1992, I was wondering what sort of sports town is this? I knew it was a Packers town, but is it a baseball town or a basketball town?
Yeah.
And I think it's a basketball bandwagon town. If the basketball team is winning, people will come out. And there were
82-83 was great for the Brewers.
And 2000 to 2002 were good for the Bucks. But they've been actually in the middle for so long where they're not so good to do well in the playoffs, but not so bad that they tanked and got a number 1 pick. But they've had 3 of their last 4 drafts have been incredible, getting Jabari Parker, Giannis, and now Brogdon, who's their a rookie point guard. It's been a good. It only looks up from here.
I think I've been back to watch the Bucks a couple of times this season. I hadn't been to Bucks games recently, and I got to tell you, they are a fun team to watch. They scrap, they hustle, they play the whole game.
Tickets are still cheap, though. Tickets are still cheap.
And tickets are cheap, so that made it last
How much you pay for your
long.
tickets? I paid $29 for a really good seat.
30, 35, and had great seats. So anyway, okay, that's a promotion for the Bucks.
Hey.
All right, Giannis is a winner, and now a considerably shorter man is your loser.
Right. Okay. So
He's not super short. I'm shorter than Giannis.
Right. So we've been talking about him a lot lately. House Speaker Paul Ryan. He's been kind of flipping between winner and loser. I would say this has been a rougher week for him, so I'm going to call him a loser. They're starting out with these, a new Republican president is going to be coming in, obviously, who we've been talking about. They have control in D.C., and the first thing they do is this whole ethics watchdog attempt, which tanks. But basically, it seemed like Ryan spoke out against it, but then defended it. But then they quickly backed away after all the criticism, including questions from Donald Trump about the timing. Right. And it just is not the way you want to start your new session when you have these majorities with like a overreach that has people questioning what your priorities are, and to be flipping that much, it just doesn't.
It does seem to indicate that there is going to be tension between Ryan and Trump, that there's no real honeymoon, and if Ryan makes any missteps, you can expect Donald Trump to jump on him.
Except that, don't you think that Ryan also wanted the agenda to be more about repealing Obamacare and tax reform? The ethics thing, I can't believe he wanted that to be at the top.
He didn't.
So didn't Trump and Ryan sort of work in tandem on this one?
Yeah. But at the same time, it was easy to call them out. Since he's the leader, he's the one in charge. And so, in a sense, the buck stops with Paul Ryan. Yeah. And if he can't control his own caucus, then if the caucus goes in a bad direction or Paul Ryan doesn't have control of the caucus, I think Trump is going to be quick to point either one of those things out.
So let's go to some reader questions. Mary, I'm going to give you the first one. Actually, this is addressed to Craig Gilbert. He kind of addressed it in his segment, but let me ask you anyway. The reader wants to know, why is ethics such a big story? Is every little thing discussed within the party caucus, meaning the Republicans, going to become a big deal?
Well, they do have control, so what they do and the decisions they make are it's going to get a lot of attention. I noticed that that person, they were molehill, so obviously they don't think it's a very big deal. I think it is, honestly. You know, they're coming in with this position of strength. They want to show that they're focused on jobs and what they say their priorities are. So if you immediately jump off and start doing things that are, you know, basically saying we want to police ourselves instead of having somebody independent, it's not a good message.
There are a lot of temptations for people in office in terms of influence from outsiders. You know, any number of things that things can go wrong, and the question is who's going to keep an eye on them, and do we trust the Republicans to oversee themselves and you know, and it doesn't work for Democrats either.
It doesn't matter who the party is.
Right.
And it's not like Congress is,
are the same.
you're right, and Congress doesn't exactly have this like peak popularity among American people. They're right up there with like bed bugs or something like that. So I mean,
they're down there with journalists, I think,
yes,
actually.
yeah, down there with us. Yeah. So I feel like they probably.
Though we can regulate ourselves just fine.
Right, right. So
that's what lawyers do, I thought.
Yeah. So let's go to the next question. It'll have to be our last one for today. Did the Democrats ever have such a large majority in the state legislature as large as the Republicans have now? And if so, when was that?
Actually,
Dan,
we
do
know
you have the answer to that question?
We do have the answer to that. In 1977, during the legislative session, then the Democrats had 66 members in the Assembly and 23 members in the Senate, based on my extensive Wikipedia research.
So it's been a while.
It's been a while. But in the 70s, they did put up.
Time.
Yeah, you were 77. You were how old?
Like 3 or 4, yeah.
And I was 13. So it's been a while. But in the 70s, they had that sort of control. In the Assembly, they had, in the upper 50s, the Democrats did. They had numbers in the upper 50s and in the 60s. Once they got, I think 67 was their highest. So yeah, we've had this. And actually, my very first job covering politics was in West Virginia, and there the state Senate was, there are 34 members, 33 Democrats, 1 Republican. So yeah, it can be much more partisan than it is right now.
It can be. All right, we'll have to leave it there. Thanks to my colleagues Dan Bice and Mary Spacuzza, also Patrick Marley, Anyssa Johnson, and Craig Gilbert. Thanks for joining us on OnPolitics. I'm David Haynes.